Last week, in a hearing before the House Committee on Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas announced the creation of a Disinformation Governance Board, which would give the federal government more power to censor or combat disinformation online. This move drew widespread criticism. Many have pointed out now that the reported head of the Disinformation Governance Board, or DGB as they're calling it, herself has a history of disinformation, which is crazy and you almost can't make up. And I think reveals what's really going on here, that it's not a good faith effort to combat bad information or disinformation or foreign propaganda, but rather an effort by the left to gain a monopoly on disinformation and to use the power of the government to weaponize that monopoly. Interestingly enough, this is something that we actually took a very deep look at on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and we recognize the risk of foreign disinformation, but if you read our report, took a balanced approach. For example, the underlying assumption of the report is that we don't have the arrogance to believe that the government could be the arbiter of the truth. Now, the government could do a better job of monitoring foreign propaganda narratives, terrorist propaganda narratives, violent extremist narratives in the U.S. media and social media environment. It could do a better job of informing the public of the bad actors that are trying to destroy us out there, be they the Chinese Communist Party or Salafi jihadist organizations, and then present factual information on topics treated in such propaganda. But the government must resist the impulse to become the arbiter of the truth and to use its power to shut down speech, as we've seen repeatedly again. And I think as we think about this complex problem of how do we create a healthier social media ecosystem, if I can't convince everyone just to get off social media, which is my preferred outcome, one, I think, low-hanging fruit, and it's actually something that I wrote to the previous CEO of Twitter, and he did not give a coherent response, at Jack Dorsey, is that we should not allow foreign government officials onto our social media platforms if they deny their own citizens access to those platforms. So, for example, every single day, the communists in China are all over our social media platforms spreading disinformation, spreading false narratives about the U.S., throwing cold water on the idea that the pandemic, for example, originated in Wuhan, blaming the U.S. for the outbreak of the pandemic, and our social media companies do nothing about it. And most people forget that your average citizen in China has no access to American social media because the party controls access to information. So at the same time, we take more robust steps to kick communist apparatchiks off of our platforms. We also need to avoid the temptation to become more like those forms of government, those authoritarian forms of government where a single party gets to control what is considered acceptable narratives or gets to dictate what is considered truth or the facts, because of course that brings us further away from truth and more towards government disseminated propaganda.